and the 107th President of the National Press Club. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists committed to our profession's future through our programming, with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at press.org. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker. And those of you attending today's event. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. If you hear applause in our audience, I note that members of the general public are attending, and so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. We always put that disclaimer in because it's important to do so. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Ken Yates, Senior Vice President, Jefferson Waterman International. Eric, please hold your applause until I finish. I know you're eager to do so. Eric Meltzer, New Systems Specialist, The Associated Press. Deborah Alfarone, reporter and anchor for WUSA Today 9. Our friend, His Excellency Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, the South African Ambassador to the United States. David Calloway, Editor-in-Chief of USA Today. Mrs. Nompumelelo Zuma, the First Lady of the Republic of South Africa. Jerry Zremski, the Washington Bureau Chief of the Buffalo News, Chair of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, and a former President of the National Press Club. Skipping over our guest of honor for a moment, Kasia Klemosinska, Bloomberg News correspondent and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's event. Thank you so much, Kasia. Ms. Maite Nkwama Mushabani, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Paul Barber, the North America editor of AFP TV. Connie Long, President of Audiovisual News and its senior White House correspondent, who for many years was familiar to South Africans during the apartheid period as the voice of the South African Broadcasting Corporation from Washington. And when she met Nelson Mandela when he was here 20 years ago, he said that on the radios they were smuggled into their cells. Connie's broadcasts gave them hope. Thank you for being such an active member of the National Press Club, Connie. Tony Cully Foster, founder and president of CFCO International and an independent counsel to the CEO of Africa Today TV, which launches today. At this very podium, nearly 20 years ago, on October 7th, 1994, Nelson Mandela thanked the United States and international media for supporting South Africa's struggle for democracy and to fight against apartheid. He talked about South Africa's urgent need to address questions of economic growth, development, and equal distribution of wealth and income. 2 decades later, our guest of honor today, the current South African president, His Excellency Jacob Zuma, presides over a much improved country. Apartheid is long ended. Many more in South Africa have access to clean water and electricity. The murder rate has been cut by more than half, and the proportion of those living on less than $2 a day has declined. Even so, South Africa remains economically unequal. The country has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, and the IMF lowered the country's growth forecast this year due to electricity shortages and labor conflicts. In a positive development, South Africa was invited to join Brazil, Russia, India, and China in an association of large emerging market economies known as the BRICS. These nations seek more involvement in international affairs and more access to resources. Last month, President Zuma and other BRICS leaders agreed to set up a $50 billion new development bank and a $100 billion currency exchange reserve, lowering their dependence on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. President Zuma in May secured his second term as the country's leader. This week, he is in Washington to participate in the U.S. Africa Summit. He is seeking more trade and investment, as well as President Obama's support for various African Union economic development programs, plus peace and security, climate change, and environmental protection issues. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming to the National Press Club, Jacob Zuma, President of the Republic of South Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. The President of the National Press Club, Mr. Myron Belkind, ministers and deputy ministers who are here, particularly the ones who are accompanying me to this great country. Ambassadors who are with us here, particularly Ambassador to South Africa, representing the United States, and the Ambassador to the United States representing South Africa. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak to you today from the same podium that our President Nelson Mandela spoke at 20 years ago, as we have heard, when he was thanking the United States and the media for having supported our struggle. He was the South Africa's first democratically elected president. I would like to thank the National Press Club for providing this unique opportunity for us to talk about our country's journey towards a truly non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa. We have achieved a lot in 20 years since the dawn of freedom in 1994. We have laid a firm foundation for a thriving democracy in a short space of time. Amongst our key achievements is the manner in which we have created an open democracy and an open society. We pride ourselves in having a progressive constitution that enshrines freedom and expression and that of the media. We are also proud of our well-established democratic processes, such as the holding of elections successfully and transparently every 5 years. In May this year, We cast our ballots for the 5th time, cheerfully, patiently, and in peace. Our democracy has come of age in a very short space of time. We have also done well in building a new society and an improved quality of life. We have made enormous strides in expanding access to free education, housing, electricity, clean water, and sanitation for people who did not have these basic services before. Close to half of our people are now in the middle to higher income brackets due to progressive transformation policies by the democratic government. The number of people living in absolute poverty has been slashed by the extension of a sustainable safety net to 16 million of our people who are more living under vulnerable conditions as citizens. As we work towards an ambitious target of a 5-year, 5% growth by 2019, we believe we have laid a sound economic foundation. We are also encouraged by the fact that our foreign direct investment outlook continues to be positive. Last year, 130 foreign companies entered South Africa for the first time or expanded their investments, contributing to a total direct investment inflow of $8.2 billion US, which is double the figure for 2012. Ernst & Young predicts that such flows into South Africa will average $10 billion US annually for the next 4 years. Foreign institutions and other investors also continue to seek opportunities within the continent, working with South African companies. In addition, the World Economic Forum ranks South Africa among the world's best for the strength of our banks, the independence of our courts, and the protection we afford property rights. We are also recognized for the transparency of our policy making, the rigor of our financial auditing and reporting standards, and the governance of our financial markets. Another important study was done by Goldman Sachs last year entitled 2 Decades of Freedom, what South Africa is doing with it and what now needs to be done. The investment bank found March to admire in our performance between 1994 and 2013. We took our GDP from 136 billion US dollars to 400 billion US dollars. We tamed inflation while expanding our tax base more than sevenfold. The market capitalization of businesses on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange grew eightfold. We increased our gold and foreign exchange reserves from 3 billion to 50 billion US dollars. We really have a good story to tell about 20 years of South Africa's democratic rule. But we are also the first to admit that our work is not yet completed. We still have a long, hard road ahead of us as we confront the triple challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Fortunately, we have a roadmap in the form of the National Development Plan, Vision 2030. By 2030, we want poverty to be history, unemployment to be reduced, and growth to average an annual 5.4%. These are not easy targets, but with determination and hard work, nothing is impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier this morning, we met with members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We are happy that there are about 600 U.S. companies investing in the South African economy. The presence of these companies demonstrates that South Africa is a viable investment destination. We look forward to the further expansion of trade and investment opportunities with the U.S. and other key markets. The African Growth and Opportunity Act has been a powerful instrument in achieving this goal. Over 95% of our exports get into the U.S. markets through AGOA. While opening up markets for our goods, AGOA has also been opening up and helping to grow new markets for American goods and services. We look forward to a seamless, unconditional, and long-term renewal of AGOA, with South Africa included among the beneficiaries. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hasten to add that South Africa will succeed, not alone, but as part of the broader African success story. We are working to integrate our economies and to boost regional trade. We are promoting industrialization and power generation. We are developing transport infrastructure to get our goods both to overseas markets and to the new internal markets that we are creating. Together, as African countries, we are making progress in all these areas. Transcontinental corridors running north to south and east to west are moving from the drawing board to reality. Plans to tap the full 40,000 megawatts hydropower potential of the Grand Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo is also becoming a reality. The free trade area uniting Southern, Central, and East Africa into a market of 600 million consumers with a combined GDP of $1 trillion is now a reality and a prospect. And that indicates how much we are reorganizing the continent of Africa for the best. How much we want to be part of the economic activities of our continent. It is truly a reason of great hope and promise for Africa. While challenges remain in the areas of peace and security or poverty in parts of the continent, there is a determination to find African-led solutions to African problems. Partnerships with the world in dealing with these challenges are important. In this regard, we welcome the opportunity that this week's U.S. African Leaders Summit provides to engage further on Africa's economic growth, development, and security. We thank President Barack Obama for the invitation to participate in this summit. We are ready to discuss partnerships that will assist in making African-led initiatives succeed. We hope that the outcomes of the summit can be achieved and be implemented through multilateral mechanisms. We also look forward to outcomes that will be co-owned, co-developed, and be co-driven by the participating nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we meet during a difficult period in the Middle East. We are outraged by the killing of civilians by Israel. Some in United Nations shelters, We also condemn the killing of Israeli civilians by Hamas. We call upon all sides to lay down arms and work towards a negotiated solution that will lead to the internationally recognized and supported two-state solution. We believe violence will not solve the Israeli-Palestine problem, but it is negotiations. It is compromises that people must make in a spirit of give and take for the sake of a bigger picture for the lives of their people. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real privilege to meet with you today. South Africa has a good story to tell. We are open for investment, open for trade, open for tourism, and open for partnerships that will enhance our drive towards a better life for all our people. Director of the program, I am with my ministers and deputy ministers who are in many of the tables, and I'm sure as we engage, they will also, where they will feel necessary, to come in and add or emphasize or throw light on other issues. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you again for a very substantive speech. And now we have the traditional question and answer session. Sir, what industries in South Africa will help the economy most to rebound this year from a weak first quarter to your promised and projected 5% growth?
Well, we will be expecting all industries that will find an opportunity in South Africa. As you know, South Africa is one of the mining areas of the world. We are aware that there has been some strikes in that sector, but we are consoled by the fact that the relations between companies and the unions has a very good tradition in South Africa. There has been some strikes that took a bit longer, but those matters are being addressed by both government, the private sector, the companies, as well as the trade union themselves. I'm mentioning it because you cannot exclude mining in the industries that South Africa will undertake for a long time to come, and it is therefore open for investments. But we're also looking at energy. We have taken very clear decisions about energy mix, which includes, among others, the wind, hydro, nuclear energy, all energies that we talk about. We've taken a decision to deal with it as one thing that we deal with, exploiting each of these. But also we are aware that South Africa, I think, has developed shale gas, which the Americans will agree is an economic game changer. But also we are discovering oil, and we have the abundance of coal. And therefore the issue of energy in particular is very important in bouncing back our economy so that we can move quicker than any other time before. I'm merely mentioning a few. The list is endless in South Africa.
Why should American businesses invest in South Africa?
Because the opportunities are opened in South Africa. I think we have a country which is democratic, which is a constitutional democracy. It's a democracy that does not depend on individual or political parties. It is entrenched in the Constitution. It has one of the things, well-organized labor force. That's why even if there are strikes, we are able to handle them because we have got rules and regulations to deal with the situation in South Africa. I think it is a country with open opportunities. That's why the American companies must come and invest.
What do you think the BRICS Bank will do that the World Bank, IMF, and other development banks are not doing today?
Well, I'm not sure whether I could be the judge and indicate very specifically what are the banks that have been there for a long time have not been doing. But of course, we are dealing with the African leader who has been here for quite a while. There has been a concern from the African leaders that the existing banks that have been there before have not succeeded to produce an example country that was helped successfully, and it is now thriving and doing everything. There's no country who can produce, not a single one. That has tended to give concern and therefore a mixed feeling. And that's why there's been a call that there must be a reform of these global financial institutions. And of course, they are old institutions. The BRICS Bank comes from among developing countries, comes from the South. It has said from the beginning, it is there to help countries develop, the developing countries. Certainly, it is going to have different approach, how it deals with struggling countries and developing countries. And that's a hope that we have, that it is going to do things differently. No country will go to the BRICS Bank and say, I need to be rescued, and find itself not being rescued but to more problems. We believe the countries that will deal with the BRICS Bank, they will be taken out of the problems and indeed to be helped so that they can stand on their own.
One more question on BRICS and we'll move on. Not all of the BRICS are on the most solid economic ground these days. The Brazilian and Chinese economies have slowed, for example. What effect will this slowdown have on the BRICS efforts?
Well, you will agree with me again that there is no country that can say since the economic meltdown they've been thriving. Everybody has been struggling. So there is nothing new that the BRICS countries were also affected. But you'll also agree, and I wish we had enough time, because we'll agree that even the economic slowdown, somehow the BRICS countries did stop it at some point and managed perhaps to address it quicker than it would have been. And we believe that with all the challenges that face some of the BRICS countries, but certainly it will be able to utilize the bank, better their positions, and also better positions of other countries.
What are the major bilateral priorities between South Africa and the United States in 2014 and over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think we have outlined the priorities in my remarks this morning and earlier, that certainly the American companies have a role to play with regard to the economy of South Africa to grow, as well as the continent. This will never go away and will never be less important. Very important, given their experiences, particularly on the matters that we are handling in South Africa. The U.S. companies have the experience, and we hope they will be able, therefore, to share that experience with us, and certainly, working together, we'll be able to move forward.
Barack Obama is the first American president of African descent. Has his engagement with African affairs met your expectations? And do you think his background has influenced his dealings with African issues in any way?
Yes, it has. It has influenced his dealings with Africa, partly because of what we have said, his background of the African descent. But as an individual, I would say that in itself has not helped to some degree, because many people had looked at it from that point of view, and therefore it has made him to tread very carefully handling these matters, and I think that's a reality. I believe he could have done more, but I think he always was aware of this fact, and therefore he has navigated that situation very well.
Changing topics. We like interaction, so we move on. I asked the president how he's doing. He's doing fine, he said. Is South Africa at risk for Ebola? What is your country doing to ensure the epidemic does not spread? And in what way is South Africa assisting the afflicted West African nations?
No, South Africa is in no risk so far. Ebola, I think, has been around for a long time in other parts of the continent. It has never come down to the south. Of course, South Africa is working together with all health institutions in the continent to address the problem. But there is no imminent risk to South Africa.
Even though you're not directly affected, I think many people here would like to hear on what you feel about what does the international community need to do to successfully eliminate the Ebola virus? How much money do you think it would take, and who should provide that financing?
Well, firstly, I think the world works together today through the World Health Organizations. There is no problem that they're not tackling together. Ebola is one of those that they must tackle together as something that threatens humanity. As to how much you need, I can't guess, really. I think that's a matter of health practitioners who are dealing with these matters, given the challenge that it poses, and I'm sure they'll be able to provide that answer.
How does the unrest in Nigeria, Central African Republic, and other regions of Africa impact development in South Africa? What more needs to be done in terms of security to ensure Africa's continued development?
Well, any insecurity in any part of the continent impacts on the continent. We discussed this in the AU continuously. We've tried many remedies in terms of peacekeeping, peacemaking. In the recent past, there has been new approaches to the problems that have affected some parts in the Central Africa, as well as North Africa in particular, which was, in a sense, an overflow of the Arab problems. We have taken a decision to establish a military capacity by the AU to be able to stop these. But the discussions were taking longer. We then thought, instead of going through that process, we better establish a rapid reaction force that must be established by volunteering countries in the continent who will have the capacity, the possibility to address these issues, so that by the time we come to the ideal situation, but we are in a better position to deal with any matter that is going to arise. What, therefore, we are calling upon from big countries is the support of that initiative by the African countries, that they should support our initiative. I think that's one of the points we will be making to President Barack Obama.
A related question. South Africa has sponsored a very proactive peacekeeping force in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Are there plans to expand South Africa's military peacekeeping forces in the future?
Well, South Africa is part of Africa. It plays a role that other African countries play. Some of the role that it can play, some of the countries cannot play, precisely because of the sizes, because of the situations. We have been in every part of the continent as making our own contribution towards peacemaking and peacekeeping. We will continue to do so as long as there is trouble in the continent.
Sir, Islamic extremism is now a significant issue across the African continent, from Boko Haram in Nigeria to al-Shabaab in Somalia, and networks everywhere in between. To what extent, if any, has this issue affected South Africa, and how do you see the problem arriving in the next decade, and what part will South Africa play?
Well, anything that happens in the continent to some extent affects South Africa. The issue of these extreme kind of activities have affected Africa. We have not just looked at it as a country, but the continent in the AU has discussed this matter. Part of the remedy I talked about earlier relates to these, that we have a quick reaction force to deal with these issues in many of the areas where it emerges. The African countries have in fact completed a plan to deal with it. It's a question of how much that is going to be supported, because we believe if it is allowed to be rooted in some of the areas, it will certainly spread to other areas. And therefore, we are coming together to ensure that it is stopped. It may not take quicker, given the demands to the African countries, but certainly, we have taken decisions. There are some areas where we have succeeded to stop such activities. And I believe that from now on, we are going to accelerate our activities to deal with these problems.
Corruption has often skimmed much-needed development dollars from people who most need it in many countries of the region. What should African nations do to root out the worst of this corruption and safeguard development dollars?
Well, countries would have their own way how to handle it as different countries, but it's an issue that we talk about, that we are agreed that it is not wanted in the continent of Africa. I think we have great agreement in the AU. But of course, there is an issue of specific countries. What specific countries do? If you take South Africa for an example, we have got very clear remedies emanating from the laws to the institutions that have been established. In fact, we have a number of people that have been arrested, that are serving in prison. We have an elaborate system of detecting corruption. We are dealing with it, but it needs people to work together and countries to work together, because those who commit crime or who are corrupt, corruption is not a one-street kind of thing. It's a two-way thing. How then do we work together, all of us, to address corruption is a matter that we need to deal with. In some areas, you don't hear much of the talk about fighting corruption, and yet it is there. But in some areas, it is talked about, it is acted upon. We are one country that has elaborate kind of structures and remedies to address corruption.
Among South Africa's biggest problems is the persistent racial and class divide of the nation. How long do you see that lasting, and what are the steps the government is implementing to make it less severe?
Well, the class division in South Africa have a peculiar history. Was one of the things that deepened class divisions was racism. Because in South Africa, at a given time, just by your race, you are identified in a particular category of a class. Those are the matters we are dealing with, and I think we are making headways because we are tackling poverty, inequality, which we said is a problem, and the gap between the rich and the poor, which perpetuates the class divisions, is a matter we cannot put the date that by this date we would have dealt with it. It's a matter that we're going to deal with it as much as we can. But we think tackling poverty and inequality will go a long way to address the issue.
Thank you. South Africa has recently launched an ambitious nuclear program. What role will nuclear energy play in the development of South Africa's economy?
We believe it will play a greater role. Energy is very critical to economic development. We have a great plan to utilize our energy to help develop our economy, and we believe very, very, very soon there will be a clarity of what role it plays. We are not looking at energy only as a country. We are looking at it from a regional point of view as well as a continental point of view. That's why in my remarks, I touched upon INGA project that we believe will go a long way to augment whatever South Africa is doing, but to Southern Africa and to the whole continent.
AIDS remains a problem throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Do you feel that the World Health community and pharmaceutical companies are doing all they should do to make anti-AIDS drugs affordable throughout the region?
Yes, I think they're trying their best. They're trying their best, and I think the awareness today is far better than what it was when the pandemic started. You know that South Africa was one of the countries that was being criticized very highly with regard to HIV and AIDS. But today, you'll agree that many countries are saying South Africa is an example because of our programs we've put in place. If that is the case, I think that gives hope that we can deal with this in a shorter time than we could realize.
A question related to the Middle East. Your party, the questioner says, called to expel the Israeli ambassador. Do you agree with that position?
Well, as you know, there was a demonstration in South Africa where this call was made. People were indeed worried about what was happening. I think as a free country, a country with a free expression, people indicated how they are feeling and made that call. But we believe calling an ambassador is not just a simple matter, particularly if you take the complexity of the problem of the Middle East with regard to Palestine and Israel. Particularly because we believe we have an example as a country, an experience that we can offer the two sides. We think in the manner in which we take our actions with regard to the Israeli issue, it must take that into account so that we don't do something that could in fact prevent you to do the more good thing at the end. We believe that, and we have offered this to both sides, that we come from a conflict that nobody else ever thought it would be resolved. The institutionalized racism in South Africa. We resolved it. We have an example which we believe we could offer. And if we count ourselves in that kind of level, it means whatever we do, we must bear that in mind. And therefore, it cannot just be a quicker thing to say, call the ambassador, then you call the ambassador. We've got it to say, what will benefit both countries or the Middle East in the long end? And as a country, we do have to take a bigger picture.
One last question before our final question. This is a question, the final question is generally on a more lighter note, and we're just building up to that. Sir, this is a question that's related to many countries, but specifically, what steps are being considered or implemented to protect women and girls in South Africa from violence of all kinds?
Well, that question in South Africa, South Africa is very active on that issue in terms of taking the position of women and children. Is taken very seriously. We're fighting very hard. The entire country, we have taken a position to empower women, not just to talk about them, but to give them responsibilities in the decision making so that they are part of the process of addressing that issue. So it's an issue that we fight continuously in South Africa, how to protect women and children is part of our leading programs in the country.
Thank you, sir. And if you could just stand by for the final question. But first, we are almost out of time. But before asking the last question, we have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming events and speakers. On September 18th, there will be John G. Stumpf, CEO of Wells Fargo, will speak. And on September 19th, Larry Merlo, President and CEO of CVS Corporation. And as I said at our lunch on Friday, I know that Jerry Zaremski, the chair of our speakers committee, and Donna Leinwand-Legier, the vice chair, are working hard to complete bringing you a very full program for the rest of the year. Next, I'd like to present our guests with the traditional National Press Club mug. We are honored to do so, as we did to Nelson Mandela.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now for the final question. I think you'll like it. And now the last question. Sir, much has been said about Nelson Mandela's profound impact on your nation and the world. That being the case, could you share any special recollections of your experiences with him that will inform us even more about the kind of man he was?
Thank you very much for that question. And of course, Nelson Mandela has always been a special man. We who joined the struggle that he was leading at one point shared many things. And I don't know which one you can talk about, but his greatness was felt by us as the followers of him. When he was the volunteer in chief, when I joined the ANC, I was a volunteer, so he was my commander. But there are many things that he did. His appearances in court twice, in 1962 and with the Rivonia, I think summarized what we all stood for. It reminded me, and I was telling the story recently, when he left prison, he visited a hall where he addressed a public meeting first, or as a last public act, 1961. Among the people who were there was an old journalist, and I'm remembering that because I'm among the journalists. And he was asked to give an account of that day. He said he came, firstly the venue changed. It was supposed to be somewhere and there were some difficulties. They came to a different, which was a smaller hall than usual. This journalist came, there was nowhere to come in. We were there as volunteers, not wanting things to go wrong. He looked around, found a window on top. So he jumped to the window and just threw himself inside. And where he came, people had no alternative but to allow him, because there was nowhere to push him around. Without realizing, a few police who were political police in South Africa, we called them special branch, were there taking notes as he was speaking. And he says he took his notes to report the following day. When Mandela finished speaking, there was a bit of a scuffle. And he did not know that the scuffle was pre-organized, pre-arranged, because it was meant to protect him as he escaped. Somebody pretended sick. He says as he finished, one of the special branch turned to the other and said, this is like a state of the nation having been given by the President of the United States. Thank you.
Before concluding, I'd like to take this opportunity to give two special thank yous and acknowledgments. First, to His Excellency Ibrahim Rasool, the Ambassador of South Africa, who has worked closely with the National Press Club during his tenure here, starting with the South African night honoring the life, legacy, and values of Nelson Mandela, and for whom we are very grateful for your support and the support of all your colleagues in the embassy who put this program together, sir. Second, I'd like to acknowledge the presidents today of Washington, D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray. Mr. Mayor, could you please stand? Who signed a sister city agreement with the executive mayor of Tshwane or Pretoria. Both cities, of course, are national capitals of their respective nations, and we are pleased to recognize them today as sister cities. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for coming today. Thank you especially to our very special guest of honor. I'm pleased to thank you once again and to say, we are adjourned.